morning again, for those I didn't see this morning. Please welcome our friend this morning, Frédéric Oudéa, CEO of Société Générale Group, Scott Walchek, CEO and founder of Trov, a big insurtech most of you know already, and Llewellyn, president, I think is the term, of Ovamba solution. That works. Thank you very much. So this morning, our discussion will turn around the three pillars of finance industry digital transformation that, during the conversation of the preparation, we thought could be summarized by responsibility, diversity, and cooperation. So all our chat will be around this kind of key concept. Please, even if everybody perhaps knows you already, we have 52% of attendees coming from abroad, so even if Société Générale is a worldwide group, I'm sure they need a bit of refresh. And we have far too many, 48% French, so they don't know all Trov or Ovamba. So please take 2 minutes each to present who you are, your business, and after the sales pitch is finished, and we do a real conversation.
Okay, 2 minutes. My name is Scott Walchek. I am the founder and CEO of Trov. If you don't know us, we have become the world's leading on-demand insurance platform, intelligently protecting anything, anytime, anywhere in the world. If you know us from our application. Our B2C play is this application allows people to, with a single swipe on their smartphone, turn on insurance for anything that's valuable to them. We've launched in Australia, United Kingdom, just now in the United States, and soon, in 3 weeks in Japan. The corpus of technology that supports that unique user interface is actually now being embedded in other people's user journeys. The other thing you know about us potentially is that we're protecting the passengers in Waymo's autonomous vehicles, where instead of the human turning on protection for a short duration of time, the machine, the intelligence inside of the Waymo autonomous vehicle. Waymo, by the way, is Alphabet's or Google's autonomous vehicle operating system. The machine actually intelligently knows when to turn on insurance and what kind of coverages. We call it state-modified risk, and it's going to be rolled out extensively throughout the world in the next year. There you go.
Frédéric?
Yeah, good morning to all. Société Générale is an international bank with 154 years of history, created in France to support the development of the French economy. 145,000 people, 25 billion euros of net income, and a diversified business model. We are doing retail businesses, targeting individual clients, as well as self-employed professionals and SMEs in France, in Central Eastern Europe, Russia, Africa. We are one of the 2 remaining international banks involved in Africa, but we have also a leading position in specialized financing businesses as well as wholesale banking.
Hi there. My name is Llewellyn, and I am the co-founder and president of Ovamba Solutions, Inc. We are a US originated company, but a fintech platform that is focused on Africa and other emerging markets. Unlike many of the wonderful products that you may be aware of, Ovamba is focused on supplying short-term capital to the SMEs who are involved in the supply chain, trade, light manufacturing, fast-moving consumable goods, the wholesale and retail SMEs, both formal and informal sector, that make up majority of Africa's GDP push. We're based in Cameroon operationally and in Ivory Coast, currently expanding. And what makes us very different from anything else that you may be aware of is the way in which we're able to turn information into data on a continent where data is very difficult to find. We've found a great argument and use for understanding African traders both culturally and ethnically, and we include that data in our risk models. Our risk models are depended upon by the institutional investors and high net worth investors who use the things that we put together to trust that the transactions we fund with their capital will indeed yield an ROI with a very low default rate. But more important than all of that, being in a panel like this and for what we do, is we're all contributing to the change in narrative for Africa's business environment.
I'm coming to that right now. So by preparing this panel, we saw that when discussing with Frédéric, that Société Générale is really present in Africa, as you just mentioned. And for you, it's as much a question of responsibilities and cooperation. Can you elaborate a bit about that?
Yeah, may I say we have been in Africa for in certain countries more than 100 years, in Morocco, in Ivory Coast for more than 50 years. So we are really part of the ecosystem. And when I think about Africa, it's of course for our own benefit to develop. But I think beyond, when you think about Europe and some of the major topics in the next 30 years, when you look at the demography in Africa, I think, let's face it, if we are not able to develop locally these countries, it will be a big issue for Europe and for the political European system and resilience. So I think there's a responsibility and a proudness to contribute to the development of these economies. And knowing that well, the ground, that's where we have, again, launched a new ambition for Africa. And what we can do, and the benefit of being, again, a large international bank, is that we can contribute to the financing of the large infrastructure, which are absolutely needed, for example, in most of these countries, towards effectively developing new business model. And we are developing, for example, an electronic wallet, having in mind financial inclusion in sectors like agriculture, which remains a core sector in these countries, and trying effectively to find ways to secure new business model, including from the producers. So we are able to experiment things which are not that natural for us. We are not Crédit Agricole in France, so we are not particularly involved in agriculture, for example. But here in Africa, we can do that. And I must say, I think that if we can participate and contribute to the long-term sustainable development of Africa, we'll do part of this responsibility challenge.
Viola, same question for you. Even if you are doing fintech also to make profit, you contribute to the development of the continent.
Africa needs to make profit at every single turn. The idea that we can be sustainable without a self-generating engine, to me, is quite ludicrous. The opportunity to create financial inclusion comes both on a digital basis and in a hands-on realistic basis. With the sort of models that we're seeing, it is important to blend capital with intelligence, learning, and physical skill set. And skill set is very important. We've been able to find ways in which to help customers to become included in business by looking at the problem from the other way around. It's very difficult to be part of the banking ecosystem if you're only able to just be a depositor in a bank. We've got to be able to teach people to generate wealth. You can generate wealth in the trade sector by allowing people to have more inventory to sell, by making it a safe transaction, by creating trust in how these contracts are put together and enforced, and making sure that the physical ecosystem will support additional inventory like what we do, which is putting together Airbnb-style warehouses to make it possible that goods are where they're supposed to be and can be sold at profit. We also believe that being able to communicate with the rest of the world is going to be a big game changer as it relates to financial inclusion. Trade is important to the planet. We've got to be able to speak to each other to do it quite well and effectively.
Would you say, to conclude on that part, that in our geographies, fintech and technology in banking system is enhancing the life of people, and that in Africa is changing the life of people? Would you agree with that statement?
Well, it's pretty obvious in Africa, you know, the traditional banking penetration is pretty low, and they will go directly towards new business model. And when you look at the usage of the mobile phone and what potentially you can do, of course, it will change the life of people and hopefully create effectively wealth development, long-term and sustainable development, which is absolutely, again, needed locally. So it's not just enough. There's also additional things such as the stability of the political institutions, which is absolutely critical, of the legal framework, etc. But that certainly can participate to a long-term growth in Africa, which is absolutely needed.
I enjoy that end of that part of the panel just to mention that there are tremendous fintech in Africa right now today. Plenty of things happening with massive volumes. Just very hard for us to present you them here because every year the one we invite don't get visa. So that's a real issue. But I advise you to go in some event in Africa. You will see tremendous things happening. Then, speaking of responsibility and coming back to Europe and other geographies like closer to us, Frédéric, responsibility in digital finance transformation is also, I assume, how you make sure that your hundreds of thousands of people working for you are not let aside with all this new way of thinking, new way of doing businesses.
Definitely, I think that as a CEO of a large company where we know, for example, in our French retail, that 3/4 of our staff will fundamentally change their job, the social ambition in at least a country where it is important, and I think, again, responsibility to manage the people and not just precisely make profit is absolutely key. And we have, as an ambition, to find, if I may say, the means to offer to everybody a solution and to offer to everybody to be embarked in that transformation and not to be left aside. We started 4 or 5 years ago with this journey with one thing, which was just to distribute tablets. Because even in a company like Société Générale, everyone did not necessarily have a smartphone or a tablet to just understand what this revolution means or could mean in the future. And then we've carried on, and there is a formidable transformation, which means a lot of training too, a capacity to accompany each individual in a very different environment. You know, you move from a world where some people used to receive documents and check that these documents were in line with what was needed, to something where you have digital process front to back, and they have to fundamentally change, whether it's client-based or the functions there, and they can be frightened. And our whole purpose and our whole ambition, and we'd be very proud if we can achieve that. So far, so good, but to achieve that in the longer term is to ensure that we find to everyone a solution and give them the means to look at this more as an opportunity than as a threat.
I assume it's exactly the same with your own customers, because your employees are like your customers. Some are trained, some are not. Digital is not...
Exactly the same, but there is a difference is that, again, the customers, they don't just deal with a bank, they deal with a huge universe of companies, and they more and more are embarking towards more digital journeys. And so it can take more or less time depending on the person, but naturally there's this trend. Here, I think it's more demanding for people in a company where, as I've said, it is a revolution which is taking place, technological, cultural, and you need to accompany them.
And just to finish on that, what will be the biggest challenge to make that happen in the 5 years? The technology or this cultural change in your company?
I think technology at the end of the day is available. And for a company like Société Générale, which is already a tech company, and we spend more than 4 billion historically, or something like 4 billion on IT. So we know systems, we know information system. The cultural shift, which means not just at an individual level, but collective one, also in the way to work differently, is certainly probably even more difficult.
I would guess that one of the hardest things, 140,000. You have 45 people?
Yes,
Yeah.
40 to 45 people.
Yeah.
But our challenge, which is similar to yours, is the large addressable market on the African continent that for millennia now have viewed capital as a banking activity only.
Yeah.
So if you come in and realize that the ecosystem is ripe to be interrupted, and you bring in different ideas, different products, not only are you going to have to do battle with a regulator who believes that less is more, but you also have to deal with persuading customers that you're not just some strange, kooky American company that has come in to provide them with capital on a basis that they don't understand. So the 140,000, we relate to that as well.
Yeah, how do you drive culture? For you, Frederick, I'm super curious. I've got 85 people, and culture still remains at the heart of everything we do. Yeah, it's extraordinary things of extraordinary people, and so I'm just wondering is that part of the reason that you get the tablets, is you can drive?
Yeah, that's one thing. Yeah. Certainly what we cannot do is, I cannot myself, you might still do, address with each individual and try to drive their own change.
Yeah.
Of course, what I do is have that process with my top 60 people, and here we are trying to have levers, if you wish, to transform culturally. Can I just take one example, which I think is very good? We've launched an internal startup call. We felt, yes, we are working with a lot of external startups. There are plenty of talents outside. But why not asking internally the people who would like to launch their own startup? And with the purpose to change also the mindset of the top 60 people. And we've selected the 60 startups so that effectively each member of this management group had to be the sponsor of a startup, to transform himself or herself in a kind of entrepreneur, not directly doing the job. And myself, I do it. And I must say, from that perspective, I have to show the example. So I'm a sponsor of a startup. Myself, I'm coding. I think this.
You say you're coding?
Yes, I'm coding.
I am shocked and impressed.
What do you?
I think, technology and...
2 years ago, you said on that stage it was...
I'm an engineer by background.
Okay.
I think the big risk... the big risk is to have people frightened by all these buzz, these words. And I think that you need to have people willing to embark themselves, understand the technology. And I had to show the example as a dinosaur. I'm a dinosaur, I know this. But that's why I spend more and more time with young engineers. I have developed apps myself, with their support, of course. But to understand exactly how you engineer the development of apps, how you structure your architecture, IT architecture, is our plans in a bank is the IT system. If I don't understand how to manufacture, I will be dead. So
can you lose your job if your startup doesn't work?
Listen, that's the board to decide. They have not yet put that as a criteria for my
it's a good idea.
Startups
Startups
with safety nets. Yeah, startup with safety nets. I get it.
You're absolutely right to talk about failure. One of the key issue and cultural issue is to have my people understand they can fail. When you think about innovation, it's about experimenting, going outside and develop things. And of course, to be able to fail without feeling it's a big issue.
That's not
in
so
the
French.
Banking world, it's not so French. It's not so in the banking world.
It's not banking.
So
That's right.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
For us, culture is getting Africans comfortable with being able to say things like, I want to be damn wealthy and rich. I want to be richer than you. For us, we have to create a culture where the idea of competition shifts for exactly what you said. If you embrace competition, you need to be able to fail. And if we don't engender an innovative society for the African continent where failure is a must in terms of experimenting forward, then we will not have the ability to take advantage of the 1.1 billion human brains we have right now that will soon be almost a third of the world. These human beings, for which fintech has a direct responsibility, have to be taught that the end goal is to go from small to medium to large. Fintech can do that for you, but as the ecosystem builders, which is what we are, we have the responsibility to make sure that the pathway and the road and the vehicle that they're going to be on is going to help them to get through the first, second, and third generation of human beings in their family and push people as far away from the poverty line as DNA will allow. This is the promise of fintech, where you blend the human desire for well-being with the ability to be responsible and wealthy at the same time.
To end on responsibility, we could speak for 5 hours on that, so I had some time to get you. Yesterday, during the debate, many times, including with Mrs. Lagarde or with the CEO of BPC and so on, data came back on the forefront. So when we speak of responsibility, you have a lot of data on your customers. Could you elaborate, each of you, about what do you feel the responsibility of the financial sectors on customer data is, and what could change on that subject?
So one example for us is, I alluded to how we're powering the passenger coverages in an autonomous vehicle. We're also using the same sort of core componentry of our technology. We call it state-modified risk or state-modified coverages. And we're powering Peugeot's entry into the car-sharing world. From each car, we get 12 fields of data every 10 seconds pouring through our API. And from that core data, we are actually assigning different coverages of risk. Like we could do in real time, assign the right coverage of risk. It's much more efficient. We save something like 65% of normal premiums. Now, why I say that is we have a significant amount of data, and that's going to be increasing as we go to multimodal fleets, like in bikes and scooters and other folks entering into the car sharing world. But we can only use that data for just identifying state modifications, meaning, is the car stationary? Is the car occupied and being driven by a customer? Is the car occupied and being driven by a maintenance person? And there's a fourth state, which has...
You can't use it to tell me that I'm lying to you when I say my accident was yesterday morning?
So this is the interesting piece. we are bound by regulation, particularly in the U.S. This one has to do with where they're in the Washington, D.C. area. And we're bound by regulation. And my point about this is simple. Data will eventually be entirely useful and defensible for pricing risk. But today, with the corpus of data that's low and a bunch of fear in the world about the usage of that data for, in ways that are prejudicial or otherwise, that it's going to take time, like probably a few years, before the corpus of data is overwhelmingly defensible to be able to price risk based upon data that's other than just state.
That's exactly where we are right now. Being able to incorporate the impact of culture and ethnicity on a regional and tribal basis within Cameroon allows us to understand what the outlook and the outcome for success in business is going to be like, or might not be. And I defend our position in that understanding Africa's genome for success is something that's never been attempted till we began to say to ourselves, if we're going to be the providers of resources in a responsible manner to the rest of the world, as the years go on and the world becomes more digitized, then we need to have a strong understanding of ourselves and what our success profiles are like. And we currently use data to understand how well the risk can be addressed when we do these trade transactions, and how well we can make sure that even in the event that a transaction fails, that we've seen the outlook on how best to liquidate and make our investors whole.
Do you have regulatory cooperation right
But you see, this is where this conversation is interesting. There has not been a harmonized approach to data and data protection for much of Africa, including Francophone Africa, where we are. So we have to police ourselves, and have often been faced with situations whereby a bank gave us data that was not anonymized, and when we said, I'm so sorry, this is not anonymized, and they would say, how dare you hide the names of our esteemed customers? We are that far away from where we ought to be. So the responsibility to be the vanguard for what we do is going to become the standard. We actually rely on what they do in Britain with the general data protection, and have anonymized and use encryption at just about every level, because some of the things that we are aware of are quite magical, frankly. So you've got to be very careful.
We have another part on cooperation, a few minutes on data, and then we finish on
just to say, I think obviously for me it's the next frontier, and when you look already at what we can do in terms of business, in terms of marketing, but as well as in terms of risk management and control, I think it is fascinating, and we are going to be able to be much more efficient, and it transforms radically the way to approach certain functions and businesses. Second, we are just at the infancy of that process. I mean, we have to learn, and also not just how to use that, but also with all these issues on the regulatory and the ethic around data management. And of course, it differs a lot between, on top of that, Europe, which has designed a very clear framework on regulation, very constrained, and Africa, where probably, again, it's less mature. So we have also a very different picture. And I think we are going to learn step by step. We are still experimenting fundamentally, and learn step by step. And we'll have to look at the parallel of the benefit of the usage, but also these issues, at least at the European level, ethic and regulation.
It seems like it's our responsibility, though, in some ways.
It is, because I'm very concerned that a lot of these emerging market governments actually don't have the right framework.
That's right.
Because they'll get super heavy-handed, which affects all of us in the end.
Yeah, and our responsibility is to make certain that the data is communicated appropriately to the regulatory authorities as being helpful, useful, protection for the consumer, and that's the end result.
You would have loved the panel this morning with the Chief Strategy Officer of Ping An telling us he has 26,000 data sets for customers, and on average 5,000 are used to do a quotation. You don't want to know what data. So let's come back to our side of the geography, cooperation. This event is done for cooperation. From day one, people come here to discuss together how to make business together, because fintech an incumbent, 99% they work together, only a few are just fighting. So could you elaborate a bit, all of you, what you are doing in that field of cooperation, the good examples, the bad example, what you want to enhance? We have 5 minutes more
so this
together.
Real quick on our journey, we started off as purely B2C. And in the insurance world, that's a very difficult proposition because the B2C world means you've got to compete against the likes of the big brands who are spending $1.3 billion just to support their brand, and to break into that with new behaviors and a new brand is extremely expensive. So we had to figure out a way to offload the consumer acquisition cost, and also we don't take the balance sheet risk because we don't have that kind of balance sheet. So it became incumbent upon us to make certain that we would move. We actually made our B2C product, the consumer product, into our reference product, much like Google's on our board, and much like Google uses their Pixel phone as their reference product, because they own everything from the manufacturing all the way through the user journey. We have the same thing now. We can use the platform, the B2C platform, as a way to inform the underlying technology, which is now being birthed into a full stack white-labeled product line. So we are having to cooperate both on the balance sheet and the go-to-market strategy.
Frédéric, same question for you.
Well, I must say it takes a very different form. When I think about Africa, you might remember that we are developing our electronic wallet called Yup with a startup, actually a French one called TechPay. We have invested in this company to enable this company to develop specifically their technology in Africa. Beyond, can I just mention a recent move that we made? So it can be acquisition also. With Trezor, we bought a startup which is providing functionalities of core banking system to precisely the neobank which are being created. And the idea for us, it's a new business model where we are very happy effectively to potentially carry on developing this kind of services, providing additional services as a big bank to Trezor to enlarge the offering and enable them to conquer new clients, as well as using these functionalities for our own purposes. And if we want to develop new activities and serve these new countries or whatever, use their skills and complement that with our existing skills. And of course, with different cooperation, where you might not have necessarily a financial investment or an acquisition, but just by effectively cooperating. And it's true on the compliance side, for example, where we think about KYC. Typically, we work with a startup to develop a system which could be beyond our Société Générale remit, actually.
It's 3 years in a row I have the chance to have you on that stage. What could you say in 1 minute about the change of this relationship between a big bank like you and the fintech being French or international? I mean, is it still as difficult as 3 years ago because of culture gap or whatever, or everybody is improving?
I think we're making on both sides progress. And again, the mindset has changed. And already last year, you will remember that I think we went from an idea of competition 3-4 years ago to much more cooperation, because let's face it, the capacity to scale up is not so obvious. And effectively, when you scale up, you might have needs that a balance sheet, and you don't create a balance sheet like this. So more and more, I think we are now in a cooperation mood, in particular in the fintech sector, where there's a benefit for both parties to work together. And I think that banks have made progress, at least certainly in Société Générale. When I look at the number of cooperation, when I think about these cultural changes that we are developing, including through this internal startup call, yes, people are more and more used to discuss with people who have a different way of thinking about the world, but effectively with this appetite for experimenting and developing nice ideas.
Viola, a few words on cooperation.
No man or woman is an island. This is true. We are collaborating, especially with banks with Sharia windows, because we're one of the few Sharia-compliant fintech platforms, helping them to digitize Islamic structures like murabahas into their mobile apps, which we actually build and provide, and into their windows themselves. And we're collaborating with global suppliers to help them address the truth and the strength of the African market and our ability to buy in bulk and have trust in these transactions and that the capital is available. But the thing I think I'm most proud of in terms of collaboration are with our customers to help them understand that managing cash flow is important, that you can continue to learn even if you're informal, and that you now have a platform to collaborate with the rest of the world and find partnerships.
Thank you. So for the last minute, I want to ask you a last question about diversity. We spoke about a lot of diversity with Africa, with diversity of cooperation and so on. Another thing you can see when you organize such an event is the lack of diversity in ethnic diversity and gender diversity in banks as fintechs, by the way, even if this panel is quite diverse today, but that's not the reality of life in finance industry. Just in 1 minute total, so not each. What are you doing, each of you, to fight for this cause, which is a noble one, to make the world better in finance for everybody?
So we start with a board. We have a balanced board right now, and then we hope that that drives that value down into our organization.
But same thing for us. We have a board, of course, and beyond the board, the real challenge is, of course, to have also at the top level, executive level, the diversity. I'd like just to mention that beyond the fact that our head of innovation is a woman, and Claire Calmejean, some of you might know, what I like very much in this, this revolution is we have to think differently. We have to think in a very open way. What I mean by this, Africa, the innovation in Africa cannot be decided in the way we think about the innovation in France. And even in Africa, from one country to the other, it changes a lot. The practices are different. So this whole process we've been talking about imposes to people who might think just one way, one direction, to open much more their minds. And I think it will help naturally to then diversify the skills, the talents, because if you do not do that, I think you will fail at the end of the day.
You have the word for you for conclusion.
I attend a lot of events, and I find that the Paris Fintech Forum has shown great leaps and bounds in diversity, and I'm personally grateful to you for that, for the conversations that we've had. I also want to say that I am the diversity. This is not a manor. If there are a bunch of men sitting and I show up, we are now diversified, and as long as I keep succeeding and being the best that I can be at running the business, running the universe occasionally, more women will do the same. We have a lot to offer, and one of these days, diversity will no longer be a conversation.
Thank you, everybody. Just to mention on that, I have a girl of 16, 3 years in a row. She comes the afternoon, she's hidden somewhere, and she tells me, only men. So I worked a lot this year, thanks to your help, to have much more women, and I have to tell you, I was not even aware of that issue, because until last year, I didn't ask when you register online if you were a man or a woman. So I couldn't do you statistics. We did it this year. You were 24% women in the attendance, only 22 on stage. We targeted 25, but sometimes it's difficult. For one reason, someone told me yesterday, even if in the board you put more women, they are less than men. So when something arises, they are the one who cancel to come here because they have to work. So we have all to work to make that better. And every year I will give the statistic and share with everybody, and we work together to make that better. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.